Hi, thank you for joining us, Khadija. Before we start, would you like to introduce yourself and share a bit more about why you decided to write this article?
Yes, hi, I'm Khadija. I am a first year German student at St. John's College. And recently I've really been trying to get into student journalism and getting more involved with student magazines through artwork and illustrations. And I recently wrote an article about self-help books and whether or not they're more helpful or whether or not they're actually a hindrance. And the reason I wrote this is because I've really been into personal development for a really long time, and over the years I've read many self-help books, but I really enjoyed reading Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F, because I think he took a very counterintuitive approach to self-help books, and I think he's really helped me shift my perspective on what I believe to be helpful and what I believe to be a meaningful way to live your life.
So, what about his books have made you realize that self-help books are a bit should be interpreted differently from how the other self-help books put it out there to be?
I think the main thing that I really took away from his book is the fact that so many self-help books are predicated on the idea of trying to become happier, trying to become wealthier, always trying to have more. And I think a lot of that has to do with the capitalist society that we live in. Everyone's constantly focused on trying to get more out of their life. But I actually really enjoyed the way that Manson focused on trying to get less out of life, by focusing on fewer things, but actually focusing on things that truly matter to you, whether that's having fewer relationships, but having more meaningful relationships, trying to focus on doing fewer things, but trying to get more out of the few things that you're focused on. And I think for me personally, I really resonated with this because I am someone who is naturally very driven and very motivated, and I always want to do so many things. But I found since reading this book and actually thinking about what things truly matter to me, I'm honing definitely a lot more onto those fewer things and getting a lot more out of it. And I think especially for a lot of people who are very academically driven and motivated, sometimes it can be quite detrimental to always be focused on like trying to be more productive or, you know, tying your self-worth to that sort of stuff. Whereas I think it's more important, especially in this day and age, to try and focus on the things that are meaningful. And I think a lot of people have definitely had a lot of time for self-reflection and introspection during these times. And I've definitely personally tried to hone more of my energy into things that make me happy, whether that's writing, spending time in nature, spending time with my friends. And I think I will always remain as motivated and driven and as academic as I've always been. But I'm also learning that there's other things in life which are just as important that I need to invest my energy into.
Would you then say that the contents of his books and the kind of suggestions that he gives in his books would replace some other self-help books? For example, those that teach specific leadership skills or specific mindfulness or meditation meditative skills? Or do you think it's just more of like having a new frame of mind that people can adopt and approach these other books with as well?
I think it's definitely got a lot to do with shifting your perspective and shifting your mindset. One of the things that he spoke about was I'm somebody who's like really into affirmations, and I grew up, you know, doing a lot of manifestations when I was younger, things such as like saying I'm happy, I'm confident, I am enough. And I think those things are really powerful things to be saying to yourself. But one of the things that he said is that ironically, by standing in front of a mirror and affirming to yourself that I am really happy, if you were actually happy, would you be constantly needing to say that to yourself? And I think one of the things that he really focused on was the fact that people kind of live in a self-delusional state where they're trying to convince themselves that they're really happy with the job or relationship or career that they're in. And he tried to try and encourage people to shift their perspective and question whether they were actually that happy. And I think I really resonated with that because I think sometimes you can try and like convince yourself that you're happy with something, and then that in turn stops you from ever changing something about your situation when you aren't actually that happy. So I think it's mainly about taking a more realistic, down to earth approach to life, rather than, I don't know, constantly trying to hype yourself up and say to yourself, I need to be happy all of the time, because that's not possible. We can't be happy all of the time. Sometimes life isn't good. Sometimes things happen, and he spoke about, trying to accept that, and actually sometimes using your problems and your failures to learn from that and grow from that. And I think recently I've had a lot of conversations with people who have admitted, do you know what, sometimes life isn't fair, sometimes bad things happen to good people. And I think it's having that honest head-on approach to life, but then trying to use your problems or pain that you've gone through, whether that's through past relationships or through struggles that you've gone through in your childhood, and actually using that to empower yourself, and grow from that and do good in the future.
I definitely agree with what you say, because personally, I've always been someone who likes to solve problems, and I look at everything like a problem and a process that I need to come up with steps with. And so, and for someone like me, I've definitely come across fair share of self-help books, and I tried to like adopt them in my life. But there was something in your article that really stood out to me, which was how you mentioned that you read somewhere that part of the process, a positive process, in a positive thing you can do for yourself is to acknowledge that you are in a negative situation and you have negative emotions, and that in and of itself is a good step to take. So just wondering, like, how you feel that you have tried to adopt this in your life, and was it really difficult for you to have this kind of mental framework shift?
I think it definitely required a lot of introspection. And I think people look at me now and they're like, oh, she's got it all figured out. She's really happy. She's like confident. But I don't think a lot of people realize that in order to get to this place, I've had to really like dig deep and actually evaluate every single thing in my life. And I was explaining this to a friend the other day, and I think it's kind of like a curve you have to go through. In order to feel better, you really have to dip down deep first and then try and rise back up again. And I suppose like the best example I can probably use for this is like relationships I've been in the past, where I've tried to convince myself that I'm really happy in them, and I'm like, oh, it's all going great, like it's fine. And it really wasn't. And in order to try and get out of those relationships, I had to actually accept that what was going on, I wasn't happy in that situation. And then try and move on from that, and basically just like set higher standards for myself. And I think a lot of the time when people are unhappy, they tend to become a victim of their situation, and they tend to blame external factors. And I honestly personally think that if something is constantly happening to you, if you constantly feel like everyone else is really annoying, or everyone else is, being condescending towards you, then reality is it's probably you who's the issue. As harsh as that sounds, if you're constantly having the same issues, you have to realize that it's you who probably is the issue, and somehow you need to shift your perspective and think, what can I actually do to change this? Whether that's, I don't know, thinking, my teachers keep on giving me bad feedback on my work, and it's their fault because they're bad teachers. Maybe they might not be the best people who are teaching you, but maybe you also need to start putting more work into, your essays or your assignments. And especially with like friendships, I think I've been speaking to a few friends recently who have been saying that, I don't know, they don't necessarily feel like they have really close, meaningful friendships. And I remember reading somewhere that friendship is a sharing of vulnerability. And I think that in order to feel closer to people, you obviously have to open up. But in order to do that, that can be quite difficult. But I think that the relationships I have that are the closest in my life are the friendships that are the friends that I've opened up the most with and actually been vulnerable with. And, it doesn't feel nice to be vulnerable with people. Like, it doesn't feel nice to open up and be vulnerable. But I actually think you get more out of those friendships and knowing that you have a closer connection to those people than just having like surface level, superficial connections, which are based off of, partying or drinking or, stuff like that.
And just another question, do you think that the culture of having those self-help videos on YouTube, or those life coach videos on YouTube, actually help people to adopt a healthier mindset towards self-help? Or do you think that it kind of breeds this negative framework of thinking that people approach self-help with?
It's actually really interesting because I think my perspective has definitely changed from a few years ago. I used to be really into watching personal development videos by people like Tony Robbins and Joseph McClendon and Eric Thomas. And I was actually speaking to a friend the other day who I showed a video of Eric Thomas. And in it, he was basically really trying to hone in the fact that in order to achieve anything in life, if you really want to, start a business, or you want to start a new career or go to a great university, like, you have to make sacrifices. And he was like, you should sacrifice, you should give up your phone, you should be sacrificing sleep. He was talking about how Beyonce was like singing on stage, and then 3 days went by and she hadn't eaten. And I remember at the time when I was watching this video a few years ago, I was like, yeah, I need to sacrifice loads of stuff in order to get really good grades for my A levels. I need to, if I want to get into Oxford, I need to work really hard for that. And I can, like, it's all right if I sacrifice my social life for that and sacrifice sleep for that. And I actually think that is a really unhealthy mindset to have, especially for somebody who is, I would say, I'm naturally very driven. I think, yes, in order to achieve some things in life, you sometimes need to sacrifice, maybe one or two social outings. But I think where you're constantly having to sacrifice things, I don't think that's a healthy mindset to have. And I think especially right now with COVID, one of the things that I've really learned to value is my connections and my relationships to other people. And I honestly don't think I could get through life without having other people around me. So I think, yes, there is an extent to which you need to be driven and motivated. But I think for people who are naturally already very motivated and very oriented towards academia, sometimes listening to those things can be very detrimental. So I really think it depends on the person. I think it depends on how much you're willing to take away from that. But I think one of the main things that's really helped me is that a few years ago, I remember reading about how there's basically these 6 fundamental human needs that everybody has. And those are love and connection, significance, contribution, variety, stability, and growth. And depending on the order in which you rank these values, that's how you should try and, like, set your goals and try and live your day. And I think a few years ago, I really ranked growth and significance quite highly. And actually, upon having conversations with people and, having a lot of self-reflection, especially throughout this whole pandemic, I've realized that I actually rank love and connection the highest. And yeah, I am gonna always be career oriented and I am always going to be a motivated person, but I think now more than ever I'm learning to value my relationships with people a lot higher, rather than listen to these self-help books which constantly tell you work, like productivity, sacrifice everything. I really don't think that's good advice to be giving people.
Well, it sounds like you had a really fruitful journey and fulfilling growth through this, and I'm really happy to hear that for you. And I was just wondering if you have anything and any advice to share with people who may be interested in getting started in this self-help journey for themselves, but also what other tips you have for them. For example, are there any fiction books that you recommend, or do you recommend like doing like exercise or meditation to go with this whole journey and this whole process?
I personally, I think everyone's journey is relative to them. I think everyone's at different stages of their life with, self-discovery, finding out where they actually derive meaning from their life. And I think for me, I am a naturally very creative person. So I find a lot of peace, and meditation is great and mindfulness is important, but mindfulness doesn't necessarily mean meditation. People can be mindful in different ways. Like, I was talking to one of my friend's mums, and I was saying that I do quite like meditation because I think deep breathing really helps me feel calm and collected and centered. But she was saying that for her, going on bike rides is her form of mindfulness. So I think it's like everyone needs to kind of find their ways to, like, basically get back in tune with themselves and feel happy. So for me, that's by doing artwork, spending time with people that I love, spending time in nature, doing exercise. I really enjoy running. I really enjoy swimming. I do really enjoy yoga as well, but it's different for every person. And I think people need to take a more compassionate approach towards self-help. Instead of constantly trying to be more, do more, want more, you should try and focus on the things which truly matter to you, and then try and like orient your life towards doing those sorts of things on a daily basis. Where, like, for me personally, that means writing maybe every evening, or writing down things that I'm grateful for if I'm feeling sad. But I think it's also an acceptance of the fact that you can't be happy all the time. You need to recognize your emotions, and basically just becoming more in tune with yourself. I used this very strange example yesterday with a friend when I was saying about how life is about ups and downs. And if you look at a heart monitor, there are peaks and there are troughs. And if you didn't have those peaks and troughs, you would have a straight line, and that would mean you're dead. So, life is about ups and downs. And you need to experience the bad times as well as the good times. And I think, honestly, just opening up with people and being more honest with myself about how I'm feeling, but also opening up with my friends and having these conversations and saying, I have been through bad times. My mental health isn't great today. I don't want to be working today because I actually need to take some time for self-care. I think that's important. I think everyone just needs to be more realistic with themselves and stop constantly trying to pretend that we're happy and pretend that everything's great when it's really not. Because if you don't, nothing's going to change. You're not going to change anything, and that means that things are going to keep on happening that you're unhappy with. So yeah, overall, take a more compassionate approach to self-help.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and to our audience, hopefully you have a chance to check out Khadijah's articles. And thank you, and perhaps we can call again sometime to discuss something else related to personal development or self-help.
Yes, definitely. I would love to. Thank you very much for having me.